The best iPhone 15 Pro feature won't necessarily be the redesigned titanium frame, or the thinner bezels, or the upgraded camera, or even those 2 extra haptic engines, but in fact, it may be this one right here. And no, that is not the mute button. If you've been watching our previous videos, you probably know that Apple is removing the physical buttons on the iPhone 15 Pro and replacing them with haptic buttons. Ones that don't actually press, but instead ones that give you a haptic feedback and therefore the impression that you've pressed them. Pretty much just like a trackpad on a MacBook. And this will be the case for the power button, the volume buttons, and the mute switch. In our last video, I was discussing the idea of the mute switch potentially getting upgraded to be a customizable button. So similar to the action button on the Apple Watch Ultra that can be remapped to certain apps and certain functions of your choice. Well, this is no longer a theory because according to leaker Anonymous AS, who had accurately leaked the iPhone 14 Pro's dynamic island, this is actually happening. Apple will have a remappable action button on the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. And this is such a powerful new feature. For example, you could map it to launch the camera, something that the iPhone has always lacked. I've missed so many shots over the years just by not being able to quickly launch the camera on my iPhone. Whereas on my Android, I was able to quickly double tap the power button while I was taking the phone out of my pocket so that the camera was already fully open by the time I was ready to take the shot. And you could also map it to things such as, enabling Do Not Disturb, or enabling the flashlight if that's something that you use quite a lot. Or you can even map it to record a video if you're a content creator, and if Apple gives us the ability to launch any app of our choice, then it would simply make this so much more powerful. But the thing is that this doesn't necessarily have to be a single-use button. It could also be the case where if you double tap it, it does something else, and if you hold it, it does something else as well. So in theory, it could have 3 uses, or even more than that. And this isn't everything because leaker Anonymous AS also shared some interesting details on a new Apple co-processor that would be powering all of these buttons. You see, one of the main concerns with Apple changing the physical buttons to haptic ones is what happens when your phone is off? Like, how would you power it on if you cannot press any of the buttons? Would you have to always plug it in? After all, you cannot press a MacBook's trackpad when it's off. And most importantly, what if your iPhone is having some serious issues, like when my iPhone 14 Pro got bricked during the initial setup, and I needed to put it into DFU mode? Like, how would I do that without physical buttons? Well, apparently this chip will handle all of that by fully taking over Apple's current power reserve mode. In case you don't know what this is, if you have an iPhone XS or newer, when the battery reaches 0%, it won't actually be at 0%. Instead, Apple will just shut down your iPhone, making you think that it's fully discharged, but some battery will remain for features such as express travel cards or keys, or even the ability to locate your iPhone on the map in case it gets lost or stolen. And this co-processor won't just take over all of these features, in fact, it will also add a couple of new ones. For example, when the phone is on, it would handle the capacitive volume buttons, the power and the action button. When your iPhone is off, it would handle these plus NFC, the low-energy Bluetooth chip, the ultra-wide chip, as well as potentially the haptic engines to still provide you with haptic feedback to those buttons. And when your iPhone is fully discharged, it would handle all of the above plus the ability to use Apple Pay Express cards. If this is indeed all true, then Apple does deserve some major props for developing a new chip whilst adding new features for when the phone is off or out of battery. Now, even though this new co-processor does answer all major concerns, some concerns still remain. Like, for example, how would you use the buttons with gloves? And what about phone cases? As you probably know, if you try pressing the MacBook's trackpad through a piece of clothing, it won't actually do anything, as it does need that static electricity from your skin to actually register a press. Well, leaker Anonymous AS does say that this will still work through gloves and cases, as Apple will have a sensitivity toggle in the OS that you could enable. So likely very similar to the toggle that you can find on Samsung phones that helps with gloves and screen protectors, as it would simply allow the haptic motor to be more sensitive. And one last piece of info from Anonymous AS is in regards to how the volume buttons would actually work. And apparently Apple is testing 2 methods here. The first one is where you hold your finger at the top or the bottom of the volume button, depending on if you want to raise the volume or lower it. And the harder you press, the faster the volume would adjust. The second method seems to involve swiping up and down on the volume button to adjust the volume. Yeah, personally, I definitely do prefer the first one, as the second one could be quite uncomfortable depending on how you'd be holding your phone. Okay, now aside from these button changes, we do have 3 more fresh leaks to talk about. The first one being in terms of the camera. You know that long rumored periscope module that's said to come to the iPhone 15 Pro Max, allowing for zoom ranges of around 10x as opposed to the 3x that we have now, bringing it more in line with phones such as the S23 Ultra, which are known to have an outstanding level of zoom. Yeah, that one. Well, things are a bit interesting here, as Michiko has now reported that the manufacturer for this will be Largan, and that Apple would only be paying them $4 for each lens sold. Now, this is apparently thanks to some tough negotiations between Apple and Largan, although $4 for such a complex component like a periscope module seems to be, I don't know, extremely low. Like, Kuo himself was also quite skeptical if Largan was making any profit off of this. Yeah, I do hope that this doesn't mean that Apple would be using a lower quality periscope module, or one that has a weaker zoom range than the competition. What's probably even more interesting here is Kuo saying that the iPhone 16 Pro, so the one from next year, the non-Pro Max model, would also be getting the periscope module too, something that was previously said to be a limitation of just the smaller size of the non-Pro Max model. Which means that Apple's decision to only give the iPhone 15 Pro Max the periscope module is purely to force people who want that module to upgrade to the Pro Max model instead, which of course is much more expensive than the standard Pro. Whereas next year, by introducing it to the smaller Model 2, people who might have bought the 15 Pro Max only for that periscope module, but who do still prefer a smaller phone size, might now downsize to the 16 Pro, in turn making Apple even more money. The second other leak is in terms of the price, with the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max models said to be even more expensive than before. This claim has also circulated on Weibo back in January. Many have said that this isn't too unexpected, as Apple has kept the same $999 price point of the Pro model since the introduction of the iPhone X in 2017. However, outside the US, Apple has actually increased the price a number of times since. In the UK, for example, the iPhone 14 Pro starts from £1099, whereas the iPhone 13 Pro started from $949, which means that the iPhone 15 Pro could now start from something like $1199, which is absolutely ridiculous when you consider that this isn't even the 15 Pro Max model. The Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, for example, starts from £1249 here in the UK, compared to the 14 Pro Max, which starts from $1199. So I wouldn't be surprised if the 15 Pro Max now starts from something like $1299 or so. And the third extra leak is in terms of the iPhone 15's display. So according to the ELEC, Samsung will begin manufacturing the OLED panels for the iPhone 15s in May rather than June, as Apple's other supplier Bowie has had more quality issues once again, which means that Samsung needs to compensate with some of the orders. And remember those super thin bezels on the Pro and Pro Max models? Well, according to Ice Universe, the iPhone 15 Pro Max specifically will break the record for the thinnest bezels on any smartphone. Interesting how he only mentions the Pro Max and not the regular Pro, despite the two getting significantly thinner bezels. Looking at the most recent front glass panel leak from Sonny Dixon, the Pro and Pro Max models seem to have the exact same thickness for the bezels. So yeah, I wouldn't really worry about the Pro having thicker bezels than the Pro Max. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on the action button and all the other new leaks. And if you're looking for some great deals on current and older iPhone models, simply tap on these YouTube shoppable cards down below. I'm Daniel, to ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out.